26-year-old deck watchman Dennis Hale was asleep in his cabin on the Daniel J. Morrell when a dull thud jolted him awake. He rolled over in his berth, thinking that the sound was just an anchor hitting the hull, and he nearly drifted back to sleep when another, much stronger bang rocked his cabin, sending his books flying off the shelf. He sat up and reached to turn on the lights, but the switch didn't work. Something was wrong. He jumped from his berth just as the ship's general alarm blared a dire warning. Wearing only boxer shorts and a life jacket, Hale raced out on the spar deck. What he saw filled him with horror. Looking aft through the maelstrom, the Morrell's stern was missing. Then, as the ship heaved with the heavy seas, the ship's stack and aft deckhouse rose from below, lights still shining, heaving high above him. Their mighty ship had torn in two. Dennis Hale and his crewmates had only 8 minutes before they would be thrown to the mercy of Lake Huron. Only one of them would survive. Did you know that your information is probably being sold online right now? There are hundreds of data brokers out there who collect and sell your personal data. Having your personal information out there can make you vulnerable to all kinds of risks, from spam and phishing scams to identity theft, and even harassment and stalking. You have the right to stay private and protect your personal data. This is all a bit spooky, but I feel a lot better now that I have Delete Me to help keep my information private. Delete Me is a hands-free subscription service that will remove your personal information that's being sold online. Only a few days after signing up, Delete Me found my information being sold by almost 100 different data brokers. That included my name, address, phone number, and even my age. Delete Me automatically helped remove my personal data from 98 separate listings, and they continue to monitor these lists to help keep my information private. I feel a lot better having this extra level of privacy and protection. If you want help protecting your data, give Delete Me a try today. Delete Me is now offering a special deal for the Big Ol' Boats crew. Get 20% off Delete Me eligible consumer plans when you go to joindeleteme.com/boats and use the promo code BOATS at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/boats, promo code BOATS. This offer is available for customers in the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. Thank you to Delete Me for supporting the channel. Check them out using the link below. And now, back to the story of the Daniel J. Morrell. In the mid to late 1800s, demand for iron and steel skyrocketed as the United States rapidly industrialized. This need for raw materials created lucrative opportunities for shipping companies on the Great Lakes, fueling a boom in large bulk freighters. The Cambria Steamship Company, a subsidiary of the Cambria Iron Company, was formed in 1906 to manage a new fleet of vessels for the growing Pennsylvania-based iron and steel producer. The company commissioned 2 nearly identical vessels that would be built in tandem. The Edward Y. Townsend would be constructed by Superior Shipbuilding in Superior, Wisconsin, and the Daniel J. Morrell would be constructed by West Bay Shipbuilding in West Bay, Michigan. The Townsend was launched on August 18, 1906, and the Morrell followed only a few days later on the 22nd. Both were named after executives of the Cambria Iron Company. Daniel Johnson Morrell became superintendent and manager of the company in 1855, shortly after its founding. In addition to sporting an impressive neckbeard, he also served 2 terms in the United States House of Representatives before he passed away on August 19, 1885. At the time of her launch at 603 feet or 184.6 meters, the Daniel J. Morrell was dubbed Queen of the Lakes, the unofficial title given to the longest vessel serving on the Great Lakes. She was quickly eclipsed by the William B. Kerr, which was launched on December 29, 1906. 6 different vessels held the title in 1906, showing just how quickly newer and larger vessels were entering the lakes at the time. While her size was noteworthy, the Daniel J. Morrell's design followed what was by then very standard on the lakes. Designed to carry iron ore, she came in at 7,239 gross registered tons when built, and was powered by 2 Scotch Marine boilers that fueled a triple expansion steam engine that could produce 1,878 horsepower. She was operated by a crew of 29. Not long into her career, the Morrell sideswiped another bulk freighter, the Henry Phipps, in heavy fog on Whitefish Bay on August 13, 1909, causing severe damage to both vessels. Repairs to the Morrell cost an estimated $10,000, but she was quickly returned to service. 2 years after their launch, the M.A. Hanna Company, one of the largest iron shipping companies on the lakes, took over management of the Morrell and the Townsend. In 1923, Cambria was sold to the massive Bethlehem Steel Corporation, and the two ships soon passed to the Bethlehem Transportation Company, a subsidiary of the steel giant. Aside from her early collision with the Phipps, the Daniel J. Morrell's 60 years on the lakes were productive and largely uneventful. In 1922, she became the first bulk carrier on the lakes to use a gyro compass. In 1945, she was reboilered with 2 Babcock and Wilcox boilers. And in 1956, she underwent a major refit that replaced her power plant with a new 3-cylinder Skinner Uniflow engine, nearly doubling her horsepower. While she was showing her age, the Morrell easily passed her routine Coast Guard inspections. Lake freighters served extraordinarily long careers, and it looked in 1966 as though the Daniel J. Morrell would serve for many years to come. On the evening of November 26, 1966, Dennis Hale arrived at the Bethlehem Steel Plant in Lackawanna, New York, just in time to watch the Daniel J. Morrell sail away. This was likely the Morrell's final voyage of the season, and if Hale, a deck watchman on the iron ore carrier, missed the boat, he would lose his annual bonus in vacation pay, totaling around $6,000 to $7,000, which was a significant portion of his annual pay. Dennis Hale was no stranger to tragedy. Born on January 23, 1940 in Cleveland, Ohio, his mother, Ruby Hale, died in childbirth. He was quickly sent to live with his aunt, but he began running away at a young age and hitchhiking all over the country. He was big and he was tough. In the 1950s, he joined the Army. And after his service, he found a job on the Daniel J. Morrell in 1964. He wanted to work in the galley, but it turned out that he was better suited for a job with the deck crew. When he first saw the old ship, he was unimpressed, and he wondered if she was even seaworthy. While he was wary at first, he quickly grew to love life on the lakes and the camaraderie he found with his fellow crewmates. When the Morrell arrived in Lackawanna in late November, she had to wait for 2 other vessels before she could begin unloading her cargo. This gave Hale an unexpected opportunity to visit his home in Ashtabula, Ohio, and spend some time with his family. He requested a short leave while the ship waited to unload, but he misjudged how long it would be before the Morrell could set sail for Minnesota. It was already very late in the season. Typically the Morrell would be laid up by this time of year, but a last-minute run had been added by the ship's owners, and Captain Crowley was eager to finish the voyage as quickly as possible. Hale watched the lights of the Morrell disappear on Lake Erie, and then he went to the Coast Guard station and radioed the captain. He was joined by another deckhand, 21-year-old John Graw, who also missed the Morrell. Already short on hands, Captain Crowley had little choice but to excuse the absences. The Morrell was scheduled to take on a load of coal at the Mullen Dock near Windsor, Ontario the following day. Hale and Graw could rejoin the ship there. Thankful for the reprieve, the 2 men loaded into Hale's car and began the long drive to Ontario, where they would board the Daniel J. Morrell for her final run of the 1966 season. They call it the Witch of November, the month that has claimed more lives than any other. When winds can shift in an instant and waves build out of nothing, crashing relentlessly into ships one after another in a phenomenon called the Three Sisters. November marked the end of the shipping season when weather and ice blocked the lakes from even the largest of freighters. Tensions ran high in those days as captains tried to meet their quotas and get off the lakes before the Witch of November could claim them. November 1966 started cold on the Great Lakes, with higher than average snowfall. But by the middle of the month, temperatures rose considerably, creating a warm and mild Indian summer. But Arctic air soon descended once again in the last week of the month, plunging the region into a cold and stormy winter. The month saw record snowfall, and blizzard conditions stranded hundreds after the Thanksgiving holiday, with the storm continuing over the coming days. In 1966, the Daniel J. Morrell was commanded by Captain Arthur Crowley. Crowley took his first job on the lakes when he joined the crew of the Lebanon the day after he graduated high school in 1937. He lived in Rocky River, Ohio, with his brother John and his widowed sister Mary. In late November, he called his siblings to tell them that the Morrell's owners in Cleveland ordered an additional late-season run to meet tonnage commitments. He told them that it had been a rough season and he would be glad to put it behind him and finally return home. Captain Crowley was never particularly fond of life on the lakes, but he continued on nonetheless. Dwight Boyer's book, Ships and Men of the Great Lakes, recounts that he once told a friend, "There comes a day when you realize that you have too much time invested, too much equity, so to speak, to make a change." Late-season runs were challenging, but above all else, men just wanted to be home with their families and friends. But a significant share of their pay was tied to completing the season, and so they had little choice but to follow company orders. The Daniel J. Morrell left Lackawanna on the evening of November 26, 1966, bound for Taconite, Minnesota, where she would pick up one last cargo. Her sister ship, the Edward Y. Townsend, followed only a few hours behind. The weather was grim. For days a brutal storm lashed at the region, but for the first leg of their voyages, the Townsend and the Morrell managed to skirt along the edge of the storm. On November 27th, both ships stopped at the Mullen Docks near Windsor, Ontario to take on a load of coal. Dennis Hale and John Graw joined the Morrell not long before she departed at 7:30 on the morning of November 28th. From Windsor, the Morrell sailed for Lake Huron. The Townsend was under the command of Captain Thomas Connolly, a man with nearly as much experience as Captain Crowley. The two kept in close contact as they sailed north, both well aware that this would be a challenging run. While they found the southern end of Lake Huron relatively calm, the Weather Bureau had issued a gale warning. As the hours passed and the two ships made their way up the lake, the wind grew stronger and waves were building. But both ships were handling well, and neither captain saw much reason for concern. But change came quickly. By that evening, the two ships faced winds exceeding 50 miles per hour, rapidly building waves in blizzard conditions. The Morrell ran around 15 miles north of the Townsend. Both ships were rolling heavily as they struggled to stay on course. Waves came in 250 to 300-foot intervals, putting enormous strain on the 600-foot freighters as their bows and sterns repeatedly rose and fell with the punishing sea. The propellers now routinely lifted out of the water, causing overspinning, forcing their engineers to reduce power to prevent damage. At around midnight, Captain Connolly told Captain Crowley that he was considering seeking shelter to ride out the storm, and he wondered whether it'd be better to head to Thunder Bay or turn south and head for Port Huron. Captain Connolly was increasingly concerned with how the Townsend was handling. He ordered his crew not to travel between the forward and aft end of the ship. On the radio, he told Captain Crowley that he was concerned his ship would fall into a trough, a position he feared she would not be able to recover from before being swamped by the growing waves. Connolly made one last call to Crowley at 12:15 a.m. By now, winds exceeded 65 miles per hour, and waves were routinely breaking over the deck of the Townsend. Crowley shared Connolly's concern. He was also struggling to keep the Morrell on course some 20 miles or about 2 hours north of the Townsend. The two captains wished each other well, and ended the call. It would be the last time Captain Connolly would ever speak to Captain Crawley. After finishing his shift for the night, Dennis Hale retreated to his cabin to get some sleep before his next shift started at 4 a.m. the following morning. To wind down, he read from Carl Sandburg's Lincoln, a recommendation from his sister. The Morrell pitched and rolled, but Hale was used to the movements of a lake freighter, even in heavy seas, and he soon drifted off to sleep. At around 2 a.m., he was jolted awake by the sounds of the Daniel J. Morrell ripping in two. As he raced on deck to find out what was happening, he ran into 51-year-old deck watchman Al Womey. When the two men made it on deck, Womey shouted, "Oh my God," and ran back to his cabin to grab his life jacket, leaving Hale alone to watch as the mighty ship cracked at her keel and tore in half, metal tearing and sparks flying in the torrent of the storm. Hale knew that his ship was doomed. He raced back to his cabin to put on more clothes to protect him from the deadly cold, but in the urgent darkness, all he could find was a peacoat. He put it on over his life jacket and ran back on deck, where a small group had gathered around the emergency life raft secured between the third and fourth hatches. The ship's 2 lifeboats were located on her stern. Even if they could reach them, the raging storm rendered them useless. The pontoon-style raft was designed to float free from the ship in an emergency. It consisted of 2x4s secured to large metal barrels. It was rated to hold 50 men, but it was hard to imagine how the meager craft could even support half that number for a meaningful amount of time. The small group was soon joined by Captain Crowley. He told them that the pilot house lost power before he could send an SOS, but the Townsend should only be about 15 miles away. He told them to use the raft's parachute flares to alert their sister to their plight. As the bow and stern ripped away at each other, he confessed that they shouldn't have been out there. The storm was far more severe than he had anticipated. The ship's stern remained deserted, and they wondered if the engine crew even knew what was happening. Then, through the icy rain and snow, they saw oiler Don Worcester step out on deck. He stood staring forward and barely moved. Then, with a great shudder, the 2 halves of the ship finally separated. The bow, now significantly lighter, tossed and rolled as waves 25 feet or higher washed over it. For a moment it seemed the stern, with its light still shining and its cargo holds open wide, glowing red as water was pouring in, would crash into the bow. Its engine still pushing the shattered ship forward. Just as it seemed that they could be consumed by the dumb gnashing stern, the aft section passed to the side, running almost parallel to the bow. But there was no sense of relief. Almost as soon as the stern rode past them, a wave swamped over the bow and dislodged the raft, throwing the men into the churning sea. Hale plunged deep into the cold, disorienting water. The shock momentarily robbed him of his senses, but he followed the bubbles that lifted all around him and finally made his way to the surface. He saw a bright light in the distance and instinctively swam toward it. The life raft was equipped with a carbine light designed to illuminate in the water. It guided Hale forward, and after what felt like an eternity, he finally reached the raft. Deckhands Art Stojek and John Cleary Jr. were already in the raft, and they helped him climb aboard. The 2 men, probably in shock, were not much more prepared for the cold than Hale. Stojek wore his pajamas, and Cleary wore jeans and a sweatshirt. Hale was the most experienced of the 3, and seemed the most level-headed in that moment. They soon spotted another man swimming toward them and helped wheelsman Charles Fuzzy Fossbender into the raft. Fossbender was on duty at the time and he was the only one fully dressed, but he too seemed to be in shock. Together the men watched as the bow settled into the water only a few yards away. Stranded on the pathetic raft, their dire situation settled in. They clung to hope that the Townsend or some other ship would soon find them, but for now they were alone in the darkness. And no one even knew that they were out there. Edward Y. Townsend, Captain Connolly kept his radio tuned to Channel 51, the frequency reserved for distress calls. It had been almost 2 hours since he had heard from Captain Crowley on the Daniel J. Morrell, but Connolly held out hope that Crowley's radio simply failed in the storm. After a difficult night, the Townsend seemed to have survived the worst of the storm. The following afternoon, as she limped on, approximately 45 inches of water was discovered in her cargo hold. Connolly initially assumed that this was normal leakage from a ballast tank. The Townsend was then ordered to stop at Lime Island in the St. Mary's River to take on bunker fuel. As the crew surveyed the ship, they found numerous loose rivets and a crack in her number 10 hatch. The damage was troubling, but nothing too alarming. Her owners reported the damage to the Coast Guard and then ordered the Townsend to sail at a reduced speed for Sault Ste. Marie, where she would receive a more thorough inspection. The Daniel J. Morrell broke in two at approximately 2 a.m. on November 29, 1966. She was not reported missing until 12:15 on the afternoon of November 30th, 34 hours after her crew had been thrown to the mercy of Lake Huron. While the Morrell failed to call in their required report on the previous day, since no distress call had been sent out, her owners assumed that there was nothing to worry about. The Townsend made it through the same storm, and it was thought that the Morrell likely just sustained damage to her radio equipment. But after calling several captains in the area and still receiving no word of the missing freighter, concern slowly grew. After she failed to arrive in Taconite, Minnesota, the Coast Guard was finally alerted to the situation. Only a short time before the call was made, the freighter CG Post made a grisly discovery 8 miles north of the Harbor Beach Breakwater Lighthouse, when they found a body floating face down in the water. He wore an orange life jacket bearing the words, Daniel J. Morrell. It wasn't long before the Morrell's crippled bow finally settled into the water and disappeared beneath the waves of Lake Huron. The 4 men on the raft desperately searched its tiny locker, looking for anything that could help keep them alive. Hale knew that there should be a sea anchor and a can of oil that could help stabilize the raft and keep the sea around them calm. Every wave that washed over them was followed by a brutal wind that chilled the men to their bones. Hale finally found the anchor, which he quickly deployed, giving them some relief. But delirious with shock and the onsets of hypothermia, one of his fellow sailors threw the oil can into the churning lake. Soon the men stirred with excitement, pointing to a light in the distance. Hale looked up, but with disappointment he realized that they were looking at the ill-fated stern of the Morrell, still sailing away from them. It would travel for approximately 90 minutes, covering about 5 miles, before it too finally submerged. The final moments of the men trapped on board will always remain a mystery. "What do you think our chances are?" asked 20-year-old John Cleary. "A lot better than the guys who didn't make it on the raft with us," Hale replied. Cleary was the second youngest crew member on the Morrell, and the one Hale identified with most on the raft. Charles Fossbender and Art Stojek were both considerably older. Stojek supported not only his wife and 4 children, but also his wife's parents. Without him, they had nothing. Hale fired off a series of flares, but after the second one sputtered in the air, much lower than Hale had hoped, and disappeared in the waves, the flare gun broke. It could only be fired if it was awkwardly held together. Realizing that there was no one close enough to see the reddish-orange lights, Hale and the other 3 men settled in. In the darkness, Hale prayed that he would die. His bare legs had lost all feeling, and he put his hands in his mouth to try and keep them warm. Periodically, he would stir the other men awake. He knew that sleep would bring death. Soon it was dawn, and the gray sky lit up to reveal their desperate isolation, with nothing but water in all directions. John Cleary lay face down in the raft. Hale nudged him, and then turned him over. His skin was pale, and white foam trickled from his mouth. The young man died sometime in the night. Hale turned to Art Stojek, who lay in a fetal position. He tried to wake the man, but he too was gone. Panic swept over Hale as he realized that he might be the last man alive. But to his relief, Fassbender replied, still clinging to life. The two men tried to stay optimistic. They speculated that help had to be coming soon, though neither knew for sure whether anyone was even looking for them. In the morning light, Hale realized that Fassbender had been seriously injured when he escaped the sinking ship. His chest and shoulders were crushed, and while he seemed in good spirits, he had developed a deep, hacking cough. The two men didn't speak much. A few hours later, Fassbender sprung up. He said he could see land. Hale saw it too, but he knew that they were too weak to paddle the raft anywhere, and even if they could reach land, neither had the strength to walk anywhere. They would be just as stranded as they were now. As dusk began to fall, Fassbender's cough grew worse. He said it felt like something was blocking his lungs, and Hale suggested that he try to cough it up. Fassbender braced himself and hacked violently, but nothing came up. He tried again before collapsing. He was dead, and Hale was alone. It grew dark, and Hale realized that he was about to face another night out there. By now the raft had drifted only a few hundred feet from the shore, but Hale didn't have the strength to move. He saw the lights of a house in the distance. He called out for help, but he was too weak and far away for anyone to hear him. He looked at his frozen crewmates. The sight of John Cleary, a young man with his whole life stolen away from him, filled him with rage. And Hale, a religious man, cursed God for making them suffer like this. By the next afternoon, Hale was in the advanced stages of hypothermia. He picked ice from his coat and ate it to try and stave off dehydration, before suddenly an old man in a white robe with a bluish tent appeared before him and told him to stop. The man that Hale decided to call Doc then disappeared. As he drifted in and out of consciousness, he soon felt himself lifting into the sky. He drifted to a cloudy land that he had never seen before, filled with light and vivid colors. Across a bridge, he saw relatives who had passed away, smiling at him with warmth. He saw his mother, the woman who died giving birth to him. He saw events from his life, happy and sad. Doc appeared once again and told him that everything that happened to him had taught him something about life. Hale hugged his mother, and a strange feeling washed over him, knowing that she was just a stranger. He then saw his fellow crew members. They hugged him one by one, happy to see him. They all seemed innocent and childlike. Everyone was happy and laughing and filled with joy. He later said that when he was in the clouds, all he could feel was love. But then the Morrell's third mate, George Dahl, turned to Hale and asked him what he was doing there. He said, "It's not your time. You have to go back." And with that, Hale was back in the raft, filled with pain and numbness, rocking with the unforgiving waves of Lake Huron. Hale knew it would be dark soon, and he feared that he wouldn't make it a third night. But then, he heard a noise. Suddenly, a helicopter hovered over him. Hale wondered if it was just a hallucination, but then two men sloshed through the knee-deep water and reached out to his raft. He was too weak to move. At around 4 p.m. on November 30th, 1966, rescuers carefully lifted him into a helicopter. All Hale could do was tell them that he loved them. He repeated it again and again. It was all that he had the energy to do. Dennis Hale spent 38 hours on the raft. His rescue was nothing short of a miracle. The loss of the Daniel J. Morrell sparked outrage and launched a series of investigations. It was eventually concluded that the aging ship broke in two due to brittle steel used in her construction, a common issue with ships built prior to 1948. When the Townsend was inspected, the damage discovered was far more extensive than previously thought. Numerous fractures, some old and some new, were found throughout her hull. Her sailing papers were revoked, and she spent the next 2 years in layup awaiting her fate. Finally, the Edward Y. Townsend was sold for scrap, and she eventually was towed unmanned, bound for a scrapyard in Spain. But on October 7, 1968, she broke free from her tugboats in a storm on the North Atlantic. Before she could be recovered, she split in half at almost the exact same spot in her hull as the Morrell and quickly sank, ironically not far from where the Titanic was lost. The Morrell disaster taught officials that lifeboats were useless when a ship goes down in a storm on the lakes, and there was a dire need for equipment that could help stave off hypothermia. While the loss of the Morrell was eerily similar to the loss of the Carl D. Bradley a decade before, it wouldn't be until the loss of the Edmund Fitzgerald that the dangers of shipping on the lakes garnered wider attention. Dennis Hale was brought to a nearby hospital. His injuries from the sinking and prolonged exposure required extensive surgeries, but ultimately he survived. For years, he refused to talk about what happened on the Morrell. He couldn't understand why he survived while 28 other men lost their lives. Racked with survivor's guilt, Hale eventually sought the help of a therapist who suggested that he try sharing his story. From then on, Hale made it a mission to share the story of the Daniel J. Morrell and the crewmates who lost their lives that night. He wrote 2 books about his experience and gave numerous interviews. The work gave him purpose. On September 2, 2015, his life was taken by cancer. He was 75. Thank you so much for watching. I want to give a special shout out to my channel members and supporters on Patreon for helping keep this channel afloat. Thank you again to Delete Me for making videos like this possible. Check them out using the link below. Alright crew, that's all I've got. Till the next one, be nice to people.